I was sipping my second cup of vanilla cold brew when my phone buzzed, once, then twice, then a third time, each vibration rattling against the marble countertop of my apartment like it had something urgent to confess. I didn't think much of it at first. Thursday mornings were always noisy. Emails, reminders, calendar alerts, it all blended into the background hum of my life in downtown Seattle. But when I reached for my phone, the chilled condensation from my glass sliding over my fingers, the screen lit up with something I wasn't prepared to see. A group photo. My family. All of them. Smiling under a string of gold party lights. The caption beneath it. Tonight's surprise party. Let's keep it between us, shushing face party popper. I froze. For a moment, I just stood there in my silk blouse, light lavender, freshly steamed, something that made me feel put together, even on days I didn't feel it on the inside. The soft fabric brushed my skin as I inhaled slowly, my heartbeat tapping against my ribs like quiet, controlled anger.
So, they planned a party.
A surprise party. A secret gathering. And I wasn't just not invited. I wasn't supposed to know it existed. The irony almost made me laugh. After all these years, after everything I built, alone, they still thought I was someone they could hide things from. Someone they could leave out, like I was the extra chair at the table nobody wanted to sit in. My phone buzzed again. A forwarded email this time. Sent by mistake. A venue invoice. Subject line. Cancellation fees. Please do not share with Ava. My breath tightened. So that was their secret to keep. The moment I saw that invoice, something inside me shifted, like a thread snapping clean. Because it wasn't the first time they'd tried to hide something from me. It took me back to a night I've spent years trying not to remember. I was 19. Still living in my parents' house in the suburbs of Ohio. Still the girl who tried too hard, tried to help, tried to fit in, tried to make everyone happy. My mother, Linda, was standing at the kitchen counter, chopping parsley like it had personally offended her. My older brother, Ethan, lounged on a bar stool scrolling through his phone, while Dad read the newspaper even though he didn't like the news. The air smelled like lemon detergent and something burning in the oven. I had just told them I'd been accepted into a design program in Seattle. A big deal. A scholarship. A dream I'd worked for quietly, tirelessly. Mom didn't look up. Ethan didn't care. And Dad only sighed before folding his paper, like my good news was a complication he didn't have time for. So, Seattle. Mom finally said, "That's far." "I know," I said, trying to keep the excitement steady in my voice. "But it's a huge opportunity." "Who's going to help me around here?" she cut in. "I didn't realize you were actually serious about leaving," Ethan added, shaking his head with a laugh. And then the knife twist. Dad murmured, "Ava, let's be realistic. You're not the type to make it on your own out there." I remember the way my hands started to shake, the way my throat tightened, the way tears pricked hot behind my eyes, but I blinked them away because I didn't want to give them the satisfaction. "I am going," I said. For a second, no one spoke. Not out of respect. Out of disbelief, like I'd said something ridiculous. That night, I packed quietly. Just 2 suitcases. A laptop that barely worked, and a small silver bracelet my grandmother had given me before she passed, engraved with her handwriting. "Grow where they doubt you." It slipped loosely on my wrist as I walked out the door alone, the air cold, my breath unsteady, my future uncertain, but for the first time mine. I didn't slam the door. I didn't yell. I didn't cry until I reached the bus station. But I left. And I never really looked back. At least not until the secret party reminded me exactly where I came from and why I left in the first place. Seattle didn't welcome me with open arms. It greeted me with cold rain, a bus stop that smelled like wet newspapers, and a tiny studio apartment that felt more like a storage closet than a home. The walls were thin, the heater rattled at night, and the mattress I bought off Craigslist sagged in the middle like it had already given up on life. But for the first time, I felt free. I got a part-time job at a local cafe near Pike Place Market. I'd wipe down tables, refill syrups, and practice my design sketches during lunch breaks. My hands smelled like coffee grounds for months, and my hair always carried a hint of vanilla steam, but the paycheck, small as it was, felt like mine. Classes were harder than I expected. Most students arrived with portfolios glowing like they were already halfway to Silicon Valley. I felt like the odd one out, the girl who drew inspiration from YouTube tutorials and borrowed textbooks. The girl whose family didn't believe she'd make it. Then came Monica Hale. She was one of my instructors, a woman in her late 40s with cropped silver hair and the kind of presence that quieted a room without her saying a word. She noticed me one afternoon when I stayed after class to redo a project I'd messed up. "You have potential," she said, leaning over my shoulder. "Not raw talent potential. Talent fades when it gets lazy. Potential grows." No one had ever spoken to me like that. No one had ever believed in me without conditions. Her mentorship changed everything. She pushed me to apply for internships, critique my designs honestly, and think like someone who belonged in the room, not someone who was lucky to be allowed in. On nights I couldn't sleep, I'd hold my grandmother's bracelet and whisper the words engraved on it. "Grow where they doubt you." Slowly, my world began to shift. My first win came when a small bakery hired me to redesign their menu and storefront graphics. The check was barely enough to cover groceries for 2 weeks, but I stared at it for 10 minutes, hands trembling, before depositing it. My second win was bigger. A tech startup liked my portfolio and offered me a contract to redesign their branding. I worked late nights with swollen eyes and numb fingers, chugging cheap coffee and eating microwave noodles, but when they unveiled the final look, the CEO shook my hand like I was someone important. I began climbing one small step at a time. With every job, every class, every night spent wrestling with self-doubt, I built a life that no one back home knew anything about. When my family called, which wasn't often, I kept things vague. "Yeah, Seattle's fine." "Yes, I'm managing." "No, nothing big going on." I didn't post much on social media either. No flashy updates. No photos of late-night work sessions or my growing client list. My success felt fragile, like a flame cupped between my palms, too easily blown out if exposed. But inside, I knew I was becoming someone new. Someone they wouldn't recognize. Someone they doubted I could ever be. And I was nowhere close to finished. 2 days after the accidental message, my family showed up at my building unannounced. I saw them through the lobby's glass doors as I stepped off the elevator. Mom clutching her handbag with that familiar disapproval pressed into her lips, Dad standing stiff with his arms crossed, and Ethan tapping his foot like he had somewhere better to be. For a moment, I wanted to turn around, get back on the elevator, disappear like the ghost they'd treated me as for years. But I didn't. I straightened my blazer, smoothed my hair, and walked toward them. Mom's eyes widened as if she hadn't expected me to look successful. My makeup was subtle but polished, my nails freshly done in a soft rose shade, my heels clicking against the marble floor like confidence itself. "Ava," Mom breathed, forcing a smile that didn't touch her eyes. "We were, in the area." Dad coughed. Ethan shoved his hands in his pockets. They weren't in the area. They had driven almost 3 hours from Ohio after realizing I'd seen the party plans they tried so hard to hide, and the invoice with the bold letters, "Cancellation fees non-refundable." "Come on," I said. "Let's talk upstairs." They followed me into the private elevator that required a passcode. The moment the doors closed, I felt a shift, their eyes scanning the marble floors, the polished stainless steel, the quiet luxury they never imagined would surround me. My apartment door opened into a wide, sunlit space with tall windows overlooking the city. Soft jazz played in the background. A vase of fresh lilies sat on the marble island. Framed design awards lined one wall, minimalistic, modern, meaningful. My life. My success. My sanctuary. Mom blinked hard. "This is yours." "All of it," I said. Dad walked slowly to the windows. Ethan picked up one of my awards, reading the engraved text. "Creative Director of the Year," he muttered. "You're what? A director?" "I run my own design agency now," I said. 20 employees. For offices nationwide. We just closed a contract with one of the biggest tech firms on the West Coast. The room went silent. Stunned silent. Mom finally lowered herself onto the couch, her fingers trembling slightly as she smoothed her skirt. "You never told us," she whispered. I felt something inside me harden. Not cruelty, but clarity. "You never asked." Dad turned. For the first time, he seemed unsure of himself. "We assumed you were still trying to figure things out." "You assumed I failed," I corrected softly. No one argued. I walked to the counter and gently slid my phone across it. The invoice was still open. "Their mistake. Their secret. Since we're being honest," I said, "can we talk about the party? The one planned without me? The one I wasn't supposed to know existed?" Mom stiffened. Dad looked away. "It wasn't intentional," Mom started. "Really?" I raised a brow. "Because the email said, 'Please do not share with Ava.'" "That seems intentional." "They said nothing." "And the cancellation fees? Also hidden from me." I continued.
Why?
"Embarrassed I'd find out you planned something behind my back? Or embarrassed you had to cancel it when I discovered it?" Ethan swallowed hard, suddenly quiet. "It wasn't about you." "That's the problem," I said.
It never is.
The air grew heavy. Not angry heavy. Truth heavy. My family, for the first time in our lives, stood in my space, surrounded by the success they never believed I could achieve, and they didn't know how to exist inside it. I gave them the time to take it all in. My home. My life. The woman I'd built myself into. Finally, I said, "I didn't bring you here to shame you. I brought you here to show you what you refused to see. What you never bothered to ask about." Mom wiped the corner of her eye. Dad exhaled a long, wavering breath. Ethan stared at the floor. The power shift was complete, quiet, dignified, undeniable. And for the first time, they realized they didn't know me at all. For a long moment, none of us spoke. The city lights stretched behind my family through the floor-to-ceiling windows, turning them into silhouettes, almost like shadows from a past version of my life. The version where I kept shrinking myself to fit their expectations. But that girl was gone. I sat across from them, crossing my legs slowly, deliberately. The click of my heels against the hardwood echoed the shift in power they could finally feel. "You came here for a reason," I said quietly. "So, let's talk about what you want." Dad cleared his throat. We wanted to apologize." Mom shot him a look, part pride, part worry, but she didn't argue. Ethan stared at the rug. "We messed up. Okay? We didn't think the party was a big deal." "It was," I said firmly. "You planned a family event and hid it from me. You tried to keep me from finding out. And the moment it backfired, you canceled it and hid that too." They flinched at the bluntness. "I'm not here to punish you," I continued. "But things can't go back to how they used to be. If you want to be in my life, there are conditions." Mom's eyebrows rose. Dad shifted uncomfortably. Ethan frowned, confused. But none of them protested. Because now they understood they were no longer dealing with the version of me who left home with 2 suitcases and shaking hands. They were dealing with a woman who built her own world, without a single ounce of their support. I leaned forward, voice steady. Condition 1, honesty. No more secrets. No more planning things behind my back. If something involves the family, I'm included. If not, fine, but don't pretend I don't exist. Mom nodded slowly, tears threatening. Condition 2, respect. You don't get to treat me like the weak one anymore. Not the one who needs saving. Not the one you can dismiss with a sigh. Dad swallowed, guilt flickering across his face. Condition 3, effort. If you want a relationship with me, you're going to have to work at it. Not once.
Consistently.
Ethan sat up straighter. I can do that. I looked at him. I hope you mean it. He nodded. Then I added the final condition, the one tied directly to the secret party and its messy aftermath. Condition 4, accountability. They all looked up. You hid the cancellation fees. You tried to cover the cost among yourselves because you didn't want me to know.
I tapped my phone gently.
So here's the deal. You're not paying me back. I don't want the money. Their expressions twisted into confusion. But, I continued, each of you is going to put that same amount, whatever your share was, towards something meaningful. Something better. Mom blinked. Meaningful like what? You choose, I said. Therapy. A personal goal. A long-delayed dream. Volunteering. Taking care of your health. I don't care what it is as long as it's growth. Real growth. Dad leaned back, stunned. Ethan stared at me like I'd spoken another language. Mom whispered, "You're asking us to better ourselves?" "Yes," I said simply. "Because for years I grew alone. Now, if we're going to move forward, everyone grows, or we don't move at all." The room went silent. Then Dad nodded. Slowly. With genuine humility. "I can do that," he said. Mom wiped her eyes. "Me too." Ethan exhaled. "Yeah, I want to try." I felt something inside me loosen, a knot I'd been carrying for years finally giving way. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But the beginning of something that could lead to it. The days that followed unfolded slowly, carefully, like all of us were learning how to breathe in the same space again. I expected my family's promises to fade the way they used to. Empty apologies. Temporary effort. Old habits snapping back like overstretched rubber bands. But this time, something was different. Mom called me 2 mornings later, her voice softer, unsure. "I signed up for pottery class," she said. "I know it sounds silly, but I've wanted to do it for years." It didn't sound silly. It sounded brave. Dad emailed me a picture of the gym membership receipt he'd been avoiding since forever. Doctor's orders, he joked. But I could hear something honest beneath it, like he finally admitted he wasn't invincible. And Ethan, he surprised me the most. He sent me a link to a coding bootcamp. "I'm trying," he wrote. And for once, I believed him. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't instant healing. But it was something real. One evening, I sat alone on my balcony, the Seattle skyline glowing like scattered embers below me. The wind carried that faint ocean scent I'd grown to love. I wrapped my sweater tighter around me and slipped my fingers along the familiar cool metal of my grandmother's bracelet. "Grow where they doubt you." The words shimmered softly under the city lights. I'd done it. I'd grown. Not just past their doubts, past my own. And now, watching my family stretch toward versions of themselves they'd never believed they could be, I realized something. Maybe they were growing too. Not because I demanded it, but because I finally required it. For the first time, I allowed myself to feel the weight of everything, every lonely night, every tear shed in cramped apartments, every small victory, every whispered affirmation, every moment I almost gave up. The girl who left Ohio with shaking hands and a bruised heart was gone. In her place stood a woman who built her future from the scraps of every "you can't," "you won't," and "you're not the type." A woman who carved her name into a world that once felt too big for her. A woman who no longer needed permission to belong. I closed my eyes, letting the city hum beneath me like a gentle lullaby. My bracelet rested against my pulse, steady, sure. And in that quiet, I whispered the final truth to myself. Sometimes the party they exclude you from becomes the life you're grateful you never settled for.